The crate sat under a canvas tarp that did not fool anyone. The guards knew what it was. The engineers knew. Even the dockworkers knew. A rare American airliner had come to Japan as a legal sale. It arrived with a normal bill of lading. It did not arrive for normal reasons. They rolled the tarp back. A forest of frames, spars, and cowlings lay in the sunlight. The nose section still carried the proud lines of the Douglas DC-4E. The tail pieces still hinted at the triple fin that airlines had disliked. The fuselage frames looked like a cathedral made of aluminum and rivets. It was an engineering course, delivered in crates. Nakajima men moved in. They did not smile. They labeled every bundle. They hung tags on every wire bundle and every control linkage. They made a photograph of every step. They were not trying to fly an American airliner. They were chasing a promise. The promise said a Japanese heavy bomber could be drawn faster if you started with a proven transport. They assigned a name soon after. G5N, a Navy heavy bomber on paper. The Navy wanted range. The Navy wanted a bomb load that mattered. The Navy wanted crews to reach out, strike, and come home. The men in white coats now had to turn a civil transport into a war machine. The drawing board sprouted new sheets. The American airplane had made a brave try at the next step in transport. It had complex systems. It had more wiring than many workshops had seen in one place. Airlines hated the complexity. Douglas redesigned and moved on to the DC-4 that the world remembers. Japan bought the discarded DC-4E. That was the beginning of the G5N story. The first truth arrived the first week. The DC-4E skeleton was heavy for its size. It was overbuilt for peace and for comfort. It had structural weight invested in systems that a bomber did not need. It had a tail that fought the air in a way the Navy did not want. The Nakajima team did not copy it bolt for bolt. They used it as a guide to shape and scale. They planned a new wing. They planned a new tail. They planned a new gear arrangement. They planned a new set of engines. The second truth came with the first alloy test. The alloys in the American airplane were not the alloys in Japanese Benz. Stress tests returned numbers that did not match the copied assumptions. The result was brutal and simple. To meet strength, you added more metal. To add more metal, you added weight. The weight sat in silence and waited to judge the engines. The engines had a meeting of their own. The design asked for 4 radials that could climb a large airframe off a long runway. The ideal was high power with good reliability. The reality was a choice among engines that were already promised to fighters and to medium bombers. Nakajima and Mitsubishi both offered options. The choices were not perfect. Power looked fine in a brochure. Power at sea level on a hot day looked worse. Power at altitude with a full fuel load looked worst of all. The first airframe took shape in a hangar that smelled of cutting fluid and fresh primer. Ribs rose from jigs like bones from sand. Plank after plank of skin went on with a staccato chorus of rivet guns. The tail grew a new shape. The mid-wing planform stretched like a slow girl. 4 nacelles waited for engines that the crew called by sworn names rather than by numbers. The landing gear looked like it belonged under a light ship. Tall, slim, and full of leverage. A pilot walked around that first finished fuselage with a pencil behind his ear. He did not care about elegance. He counted access panels. He counted cooling flaps. He counted inspection covers. He put a hand on the tire and leaned his weight against it. The tire did not move much. He drew a small line in his notebook. The line said landing roll will be long. They towed the first G5N out of the flight line on a morning with only light wind. The cowls were open. The wobble pump chattered as crews primed fuel lines. The 4 radials coughed, spat a little flame, and settled. The airframe vibrated in a way that told the truth. It was a large machine, and it would not forgive small errors. The takeoff roll began with promise. The nose came up. The main wheels lightened. The long wing finally did its best. The machine lifted. It climbed shallow. Flaps came up in small bites. The runway fence passed with comfort, but not by much. The test pilot held his breath until he saw 300 feet on the altimeter. He exhaled. He kept a steady hand and a steady pitch. The climb rate stayed in the same slow band. They circled the field. They felt out the controls. The wheel forces were honest. The rudder needed a firm leg. Engine temperatures marched up and then settled. The crew chief called out numbers over the interphone in a calm voice that was a little too calm. The pilot kept the speed in a safe corner. He did not ask for sharp turns. He did not ask for much at all. Landing brought the next truth. The glide approached with a deck angle that looked predictable. The flare was long. The mains touched. The gear took the load. The brakes worked. The airplane asked for more field than many stations could spare. The test cards for that day had all the boxes ticked. The final line said it flies. The remark in smaller writing said it flies like a transport with tired legs. A week of flights tested the edges of the envelope. The crew pushed weight up with ballast. The crew tried higher power on the same climb path. They saw small gains. They also saw cylinder head temperatures creep. They saw a few oil leaks begin to mark nacelles. They saw the long legs of the gear flex, more than anyone liked when the air was choppy. The margin stayed thin. A design meeting convened in a room with large windows and small patients. The engineers brought charts. The pilots brought a simple line. The fuel load does not work with the current power. The bomb bay is a nice drawing. It will be a nice storage room for more fuel. A staff officer asked whether more powerful engines would cure most of it. A senior engineer answered, without poetry. Only if the engines exist. They did not exist in the numbers needed. But the war had already put aircraft factories on strict rations for everything with fins and pistons. The fighter programs shouted louder. The medium bomber programs had priority paths to the engine shops. The G5N waited at the back of the line. It would get engines, but not the dream set. It would get engines that were known and available. Known did not mean equal to the job. The second prototype arrived a few months later. The team had shaved weight. They had cleaned some cowling shapes. They had changed the tailplane to ease trim. They had moved some equipment. They had not found a magic hole where 1,000 kilograms could vanish. The chart inked in new numbers that made staff officers smile for an afternoon. The airplane flew a little better. It did not solve the main problem. The problem kept repeating in clear sentences. The airframe was heavy. The engines made less thrust than the paper wanted. The field run was long. The rate of climb at safe power was shallow. The distance to a fighting altitude was counted in long minutes. The reserves once they were thin. Thin reserves are an enemy that wears no uniform. One test day offered a scene that stuck in memory. The bomber took a long run and rose while a line of mechanics watched with their arms folded. A fighter flight came back from a routine patrol and joined the pattern. The fighters were dots at the top of the circuit. The bomber was a dot near the middle. Every time it turned base to final, its sink rate felt heavier than a bomber needs. It landed. The runway had never looked shorter. If a heavy bomber cannot climb, it cannot go far. If it cannot go far, it cannot carry a useful load to a useful target. If it cannot carry a load, it becomes a demonstration aircraft, and not a weapon. That was the creeping verdict that entered the notes. Nakajima tried honest fixes. They moved to different engines on follow-up airframes. They looked for efficiency. The gain that came back was modest. The engines that were more reliable were also a little less powerful. The machines ran smoother. They climbed no better. The engineers were out of levers that a factory could pull in a few months. They investigated structure. The wing had to support fuel, load, and stress. Lightning holes are not magic if you still need rigidity. Every gram saved demanded hours of rework across entire jigs. That kind of rework was a luxury that belonged to a different year. The war calendar did not wait for elegance. It punished delay. It punished false hope. The next decision did not belong to the designers. It belonged to the logistics men. They asked a direct question. Can the airframes move cargo? Can they move senior staff? Can they move anything useful, reliably? The crew chiefs answered before the engineers did. Yes, if you leave the bomb racks empty. Yes. If you accept slow climb and long runs. Yes, if you treat it as a transport and not as a bomber. Prototypes grew floors and tie points. Bomb bays lost racks. Cargo doors were encouraged to a larger size. Interiors received nets and webbing. The big airframes went to work as slow transports for limited routes. They flew. They moved loads that the smaller transports could not lift in one go. They did not go far. They did not go high. They made people happy for a week, and then everyone forgot to be happy. Pilots had their own rituals for the converted machines. They briefed like heavy truck drivers. Field length, wind, and density altitude were discussed in careful voices. Runway condition was treated like a threat. If the runway was soft, you did not go. If the runway was short, you did not go. If any engine coughed on the roll, you chopped power and tried again later. The long gear legs hated rough surfaces. One pilot remembered the way the legs flexed and hunted. He described a landing on a bumpy strip as walking a calf across ice. The airplane wanted kindness that war rarely offers. You gave it, or it scolded you with motion you could feel in your teeth. Every file labeled G5N began to carry the same closing paragraph. The aircraft is serviceable as a transport within limits. The aircraft is not a viable heavy bomber. The conversion to cargo use is practical. There is no bomber future unless power increases by a wide margin and weight decreases by a wide margin. No one could see both conditions arriving together. The Allied nickname for the machine was a polite one. The Air Reconnaissance notes used a short English woman's name for it. Allies did not often encounter it. It did not fly deep raids. It did not appear over long-range maritime lanes as a silent killer. It showed up at times as a lumbering transport. It never hurt a convoy. It never forced a change in a raid plan. Nakajima engineers did not enjoy writing the final reports. They were honest men. They knew why the numbers were the way they were. They knew that a heavy bomber is not an airframe. It is an ecosystem. It demands an engine family of certain strength. It demands alloys that hold in heat and in stress. It demands machine tools that hold tolerances for large parts. It demands a factory that can build the same wing 4 times exactly. It demands fuel and long runways, and a supply chain that does not break in weather. Japan owned many smart engineers. It did not own all those factories and fuels at once in the years when heavy bomber dreams were floated. The G5N discovered that every promise on a drawing waits for a power plant to make it true. The power never arrived in time. The weight never left in time. The men on the docks who had rolled back the first tarp saw the irony. The airplane that began as a study of a bold American transport ended as a cargo hauler itself. It never wore its intended weapons. It wore ropes and nets and spare parts. It carried men with clipboards and men with orders. It carried things too big for other machines. It did not carry the war forward. The bomber that never was still taught useful lessons. A shop foreman could point to the wing jig and explain why a bomber wing is a jurisdiction of patience. A flight engineer could point to a manifold and explain why engine selection defines everything that follows. Staff officer could point to the conversion work and explain why flexible planning salvages pride when performance falls short. At the squadron level, the story resolved into small habits. Transport crews kept their speeds conservative. They did not chase a headwind. They accepted delays for weather. They looked for fields with length to spare. They drilled engine-out procedures longer than any fighter crew would tolerate. They treated the long wing like a friend with bad knees. A few of the converted machines made many trips. They did their jobs and took their bows on small airfields. They were impressive to visiting dignitaries. They looked like the promise had made it to the flight line. Then someone asked about range and climb while holding a chart. The answers stayed the same, mission after mission. You can place a camera inside one of those cockpits. The view is a gentle rise of panels and glass. The throttle quadrant is a row of levers you treat with respect. The propeller controls sit where muscle memory can find them. The engine gauges drift a little and make you nervous. The flight engineer touches the panel with a calm hand and a notebook. He murmurs a number. You nod. You take more runway than you want. The wheels lift. The engines sing at a pitch you recognize and accept. You climb. You do not touch the pitch much. You do not touch the trim much. You do not ask for anything bold. Engineers did try to breathe more life into the program again and again. They cut weight from places that could spare it. They tightened control runs. They tuned cowling exits. They smiled at handfuls of feet per minute on a climb chart as if they were treasures. They did not quit out of pride. They moved to transport conversions out of duty. When the war situation worsened, the big transports became targets simply because they were big. They could not escape a determined fighter. They could not climb away from danger. They could not dive without worrying the gear and the wing. They earned their living by flying routes that avoided trouble. That is not how a heavy bomber earns its legend. The workers on the line knew. They tightened fasteners and exchanged looks. They saw that the bomber dream had become a cargo chore. They saw that engines arrived late. They saw that oil leaks stole hours. They saw that the wing jigs required babysitting to keep shape. They saw that a large airplane asks a workforce to give the same attention every hour. Attention is a resource that war consumes faster than any fuel. The best quotes in the files are short. One pilot wrote a line after a run with cargo. The airplane is gentle if you are gentle. The runway needs respect. The power is honest only if the weather helps. The machine flies like a promise from yesterday. That sentence carries more feeling than a page of numbers. The comparison to American heavies is not fair and still cannot be avoided. The B-17 and its cousins were not just airframes. They were expressions of a deep base. Mass production made the same rib 10,000 times with the same holes in the same places. Heat treatment ovens ran like clockwork. Engine plants delivered power plants that could take hard use. Test programs punished prototypes until flaws were documented and fixed. Crews climbed to altitude that was needed with fuel left to fight. The ecosystem made the airplane. Japan tried to create the top of the pyramid without the foundation underneath. The DC-4E gave a head start on shape. It did not give a head start on engines, furnaces, presses, and gauges. The design team did everything that drawings and skill can do. The factory floor answered with what the floor could offer. The result looks inevitable now. It did not look inevitable when men were rivet counting and believing. Someone will ask the hard question. Could the G5N have worked as a bomber later with better engines? The honest answer is that the airframe still carried weight that would have demanded significant rework. Better engines would have helped. They would not have erased the other debts. The program needed time that the war never offered. There is a scene that tells the final truth. A G5N transport is parked on a ramp. A crew is loading crates. A staff car delivers 2 men with cases. The sun is low. The engines cough. Start and find a rhythm. The airplane rolls. It uses most of the field, and then it lifts. It climbs at a rate that makes everyone quiet. It disappears into haze. It returns tired and lands long. It is a working machine. It is not the heavy bomber men had spoken about in briefings years before. In the years after, air historians wrote about the project in calm paragraphs. They described the borrowed DNA from the American transport. They described the weight spiral. They described the engine choices. They described the conversions. They did not use angry words. They used the language of industry. That was correct. The lesson belongs on a shop wall in large letters. Copying lines on paper is not enough. The machine cares about alloys, presses, ovens, and jigs. A heavy bomber needs a family of engines with headroom. It needs long fields and depots for spares. It needs crews who train on full power climbs without fear. It needs a network more than it needs a profile drawing. The story does not insult the men who tried. They were competent. They were careful. They were working inside a nation that was running out of the things that make large aircraft viable. They produced something that flew and carried loads. They did not produce the weapon first imagined. That sober result is worthy of respect on its own terms. If you stand today near one of the surviving airframes or a model, you can teach a class with your hands, point to the nacelles and talk about power. Point to the landing gear and talk about field length. Point to the bomb bay and talk about cargo. Point to the wing and talk about weight. Then point beyond the airplane to an imaginary line of furnaces and rolling mills. That is where the real bomber lives. The G5N had a proud name. The crews knew that names do not lift machines. Engines do that. The bomber tried to be a rival to the big American fortresses. It did not rise into that role. It stayed close to the ground with cargo and hope on board. It became a lesson that engineers still repeat. The lesson is not bitter. It is exact. Heavy machines demand heavy foundations. You can borrow a shape. You cannot borrow the years behind it. Not in a single season. Not during a war that pulls every bolt and every barrel in a dozen directions. The first tarp came off in a dockyard with wind off the water. The last report went into a file with a red stamp and a short line. Transport only. The dream did not die in anger. It died in arithmetic. That is a good way for a dream to end if it must. Subscribe for more untold stories of the Second World War.